Yes, shortly before midnight, actually at 11:36 p.m., officers with our agency were dispatched to the intersection of 25th Street and Liberty Street on what was originally believed to be a traffic collision. Upon their arrival, the officers located an adult female driving one of the vehicles involved in the collision. Unfortunately, she was pronounced deceased at the scene, and evidence at the scene made it clear to the officers that the female had suffered a gunshot wound. They determined the car had been fired into multiple times. Also located at the scene were another adult male and adult female who were also suffering from gunshot wounds. That adult female and male were transported to the hospital, Atrium Baptist Medical Center. The adult male succumbed to his injuries at the hospital shortly thereafter, and the adult female is currently hospitalized in critical condition. I'll have the names of those victims for you in just a moment. At that stage of the investigation, we had 2 homicides and another female who has suffered very serious gunshot wounds and has been treated. We found that in addition to those subjects, 2 other adults were in the car. Both of those adults were injured as a result of this. They were treated at the hospital and released. Detectives with our Criminal Investigations Division have assumed this investigation, and thus far we've determined that the 5 individuals I mentioned were in a 2019 Nissan Sentra, silver in color. Moments prior to this occurring, that vehicle with its 5 occupants was at the Cookout Restaurant, which is located at 339 Akron Drive. All 5 of the occupants of the vehicle purchased food at that location. Based on our investigation thus far, we don't have any evidence to indicate they were involved in any type of altercation at that scene. They departed that scene around 11:36 p.m. and began to travel south on Highway 52 from Akron Drive. A witness interviewed described a dark 4-door passenger car approaching our victims in the vehicle that I mentioned earlier, the Nissan Sentra. At least 2 occupants of that dark colored passenger car leaned out the window and fired more than a dozen rounds into our 2019 Nissan Sentra. That occurred on US-52 southbound, very near the exit to Liberty Street. The driver of the Nissan Sentra immediately exited off onto Liberty Street. As I mentioned earlier, she was shot. She lost control of the vehicle near the intersection of 25th Street and Liberty Street, and that vehicle she was operating collided with another vehicle at that location. The other driver and the other vehicle was only injured minor and had nothing to do with this crime. We believe our suspects continued to travel south on 52 after shooting into the car. As investigators, we have to go back and start at the beginning of this, and the earliest point of contact we have for this group of individuals is the restaurant on Akron Drive. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have any information they were involved in any altercation there, but based on the time frame of when they left the restaurant to where their vehicle was assaulted, we believe our offenders likely encountered this group at or near that restaurant. So as detectives, one of the things we're asking is anyone that was at the Cookout Restaurant between 11 p.m. and 11:35 p.m. or traveling on Highway 52 during that time frame that saw anything related to this crime, we're asking them to come forward and speak with authorities.
Can you tell us anything about your real-time crime detection cameras that you guys have access to? Is that helping in this investigation? Did that capture?
In this particular crime, we do have video surveillance we're gathering. We don't have our real-time crime center. We don't have any cameras in that area associated with this, so we're having to do it the old-fashioned way, and that is contact our business owners in that area and get the camera footage the old-fashioned way. In the future, our goal is to all of the businesses in the city have them connected to the real-time crime center. We just haven't achieved that yet.
What about the gunshot detection system?
The gunshot detective system did come into play on this and actually reported to us that we had gunshots in that area simultaneously to us receiving the information on the auto accident. So we're using the evidence that system captured as part of our investigation.
So the call came in that it was the crash, and then you got there, and that's when you discovered the magnitude of everything.
Yes, yes. And as I mentioned earlier, we know more than a dozen shots were fired into the vehicle. I can tell you based on the calibers that at least 2 firearms were used as part of this crime as well.
Have the survivors told you anything about what happened and what led up to it?
We have interviewed the survivors. We've received limited cooperation from them. We have interviewed them, but unfortunately, all the facts aren't being shared with us.
And going back to the weapons, high-powered handguns, what
one caliber would be consistent with a handgun, and one caliber could be either a handgun or a rifle. It would just depend on the specific weapon it was fired from.
And the lack of cooperation, I mean, first of all, how frustrating is that, and how much does that hinder your investigation to do your job to catch these people that shot on a busy intersection?
It's extremely frustrating. I can tell you, I'm coming up on 28 years of experience with this agency. I've been on literally hundreds of homicides. Even though the evidence we have in this case is very limited at this point, I don't believe this is a random act. I don't believe someone randomly chose this car as it traveled down 52 South to fire into it. I believe at least one occupant of this car can tell us exactly who fired the weapon and the reason why their vehicle was assaulted. So it's frustrating for us that this type of crime is occurring, and even our surviving victims are providing us with what generously would be described as limited cooperation. Certainly think about the danger of this. 11:30 at night, a major thoroughfare through our city, and someone firing 2 weapons more than a dozen times. While this is tragic enough, it could have been worse.
Is there anything about the MO or the circumstances surrounding this that would lead you to suggest that it might be gang related?
That's one avenue we are going to look at. Anytime we see this type of crimes, just speaking generally, very often gang relations come into play in these. We've not established that connection in this one, I want to stress, but we've not eliminated that connection in this investigation either.
Going back to this happening, where it happened, when it happened, I mean, how long do you think it's going to be before this happens in a neighborhood and we have more victims than just the ones that are involved in the situation?
There's no way for me to put a time frame on that. I hope it doesn't happen. But I'm going to stress to you, like I have before, this is a team effort. And what I mean by a team effort, law enforcement in a city this size is a partnership between law enforcement and the residents and guests of this city. We have to work together. People with information have to come forward with that information. Not only do they have to come forward with it, they have to be willing to come and speak with investigators in person on that information. Victims have to cooperate with us. Even if that cooperation leads us to believe maybe the victim was into something they shouldn't have been into before this happened, to prevent it from happening again, they have to cooperate with us. And the court systems have to cooperate with us in holding these folks accountable.
And just to clarify, did you say both parties were at cookout or just the 5 in the...
The 5 in the car, our 5 victims in the victim car, we know for certain were at cookout. We believe our suspect vehicle may have been at cookout or in that surrounding area, and I'm basing that on the fact that only 3 minutes elapsed between our victims leaving the cookout and the event on 52 southbound. So clearly the other car had to be in the vicinity of this group in the Akron Drive area.
Do you know how many exact suspects you're looking for, or suspects?
We know we're looking for at least 2. Our witness described a minimum of 2 people hanging out the vehicle firing the weapon. There may be more because clearly we had a driver of our suspect vehicle also. So, but as far as pulling the trigger, a minimum of 2.
Have you had any previous interaction on a law enforcement standpoint with any of these victims?
Minimal interaction with them.
It was 2 females and 3 males.
Yes, and I'm going to release it in a written form soon, but I can tell you our 2 homicide victims are Toriana Marquise Gaskins, She was a 20-year-old female, and again, I'll give this to you in writing. And the second decedent is a Trayshawn Raymond Milton. He was 19. Both of them are deceased. We have a Dejae Monet Taylor, who is 19. She's currently hospitalized in serious condition. A Zion Christopher Glenn, who is 20, and a Tamia Dina Taylor, who is also 20. Now, we believe the two Taylors are sisters, we believe.
This is what, the 10th homicide that's happened this year compared to 6?
Yep. Actually, and I want to clarify that. I went back and looked at my records. It's 10 this year compared to 7. As of March the 6th of last year, my records indicate we had 7. But that's troubling in and of itself, because I want to remind you, last year we were this close to breaking our all-time record of homicides. Well, we're 3 ahead of where we were last year at this point in time. So if we continue that trajectory, and I hope we don't, but if we continue at that trajectory, not only will we break that record, we're going to break it substantially.
And compared to last year, if you can think back this far, of how many of the 7 by this time were solved last year, and how many of the 10 have you been able to solve?
I'd have to go back and get that information. I apologize, I don't have the info with me. And that's another thing that points to how frustrating this is. As the commander of this unit, these crimes are happening at a rate that I can't, from the top of my head, tell you that information, because it's coming in so quickly.
You said 28 years?
October will be 28 years, 27 and a half.
And I mean, in your 28 years, have you ever run at this rate of you guys just nonstop? I mean, it's a homicide every 10 days at this rate. Has that ever happened in your time? And how are you trying to coach your cadets and your officers out there on the streets to handle this in a certain way?
In my almost 28 years, we have never run at this rate. Last year, we almost broke the record, and something I'll point out to you that the old record is from 1996, if I remember correctly. Think about how far our medicine has advanced in those 2+ decades. If it weren't for the fact that we have a level 1 world-class trauma center here in our city, our homicide rate would be higher than it is right now. As far as our detectives and our officers, we try to keep them upbeat and enthusiastic, and they are, but they're human beings, and they're tired. They're working long, long hours, tremendous amount of overtime trying to solve these cases. And you compound that with cases where victims won't cooperate, witnesses won't cooperate, family members won't cooperate. They get frustrated.
Now, you mentioned the ages of the victims. It seems like they're relatively young. Is that something that you're concerned about with the youth or younger people, dying in cases like this?
I am concerned with that. Over my career, I can tell you most of our victims have, if you statistically analyze it, have been in their early to mid-20s as far as homicide goes. What I'm seeing as an investigator that's disturbing me, though, and it's not the case in this particular incident, much younger than these folks. These folks are 19, 20 years old. We're seeing far too many incidents where folks in their early to mid-teens are either taking lives or having their lives taken or being shot and surviving.
Captain, at this point, can you describe the relationship of the vehicles to each other as they were going down the road? Where was one in relation to the other? Which way the shots were being fired?
According to our witness, the vehicles were traveling parallel to one another, and that there are 2 suspects hung out the passenger side of the suspect vehicle and fired parallel into the vehicle.
So they were in the left lane and the other vehicles in the right.
That's the way it appears, yes, sir.
We get some more questions. Can you just offer any insight into the magnitude of this, and where do you even start in trying to, if the folks involved are not going to be cooperative? How big of a task is this? This is very strange.
We have to rely on our physical evidence and working closely with our prosecutors in these cases where some of our victims won't cooperate. Ultimately, I mentioned to you earlier, gathering of surveillance footage from businesses. That's a big process and a big piece of the puzzle in solving these things. But when the most valuable evidence that will ever be presented in a courtroom is eyewitness testimony, in my opinion, and I know that's what our prosecutors look for. And it makes it difficult in prosecuting those cases when we don't have that.
And you mentioned that you think two could be sisters. Is there any other indication as to how the five knew each other?
Based on the investigation, it looks like they are friends of each other.
And then siblings?
And two siblings, yes.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. Thank you, ma'am. And I'll try to carefully remove these.
No, I don't think this hasn't been emailed out yet.
I sent it out about 10 minutes ago. Hopefully you guys have it. You don't let me.
Hopefully everybody knows their mics.
Good. Okay, so this right here is connected to this, and then that one is connected to